Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sir Jude, and here's the video lecture for our mastery test, which we conducted last Tuesday. All right. So, in preparation for your second quarter examination, this video lecture will serve as refresher or reviewer uh, for exam tomorrow. Okay. So, as you may recall, the mastery test is divided into six parts or segments. So, let's start with part one, electromagnetism. Now, for five sections for fireworks, Milky Way, pinwheel, cartwheel, and bearpaw, you may not recognize this part because this part was used in my classroom observation for section whirlpool, no? So I'll start muna with whirlpool and then use the other part one that I actually utilized during the mastery test, okay? So since this is not familiar to the five sections, I will be the one to explain and elaborate, no? So here, we have four images, no? So the first pair of images showcases the washing machine spinner and the electric motor. The electric motor located beneath the washing machine spinner is responsible for the spinning action of the latter. The spinning action agitates the clothes to loosen dirt and stains while mixing the detergent and water. And on the other hand, you have wind turbines and the electric generator. Wind turbines produce electric power by using the wind to spin their blades. The blades are connected to a shaft that turns inside the generator where the motion of magnets and wire coils activates an electric current. Let's start first with the washing machine spinner and the electric motor. So in the first row, we ask which focuses on energy transformation. The question is, was electrical energy converted to mechanical energy or was mechanical energy converted to electrical energy? So if you have the washing machine spinner, which has an electric motor, no? So you plug in the washing machine so that the electric motor will spin, causing the spinner to rotate and perform its laundry duties. Okay? So in this case, so you start with for the washing machine to work, you have to have electrical energy, no? That's why it's a minute. Okay. That's why if electric with electricity activating the mechanics of the washing machine or the washing machine spinner at least, no? Therefore, electrical energy is converted to mechanical energy. Okay. Next, the electromagnetic principle, wherein um, I ask you the question: did electricity induce magnetism, or did magnetism induce electricity in each, or in these scenarios specifically? No. So here, once again, the all the processes were activated by electricity. No, and you have magnet coils wrapped inside the electric motor. That's why here, electricity induced magnetism. All right. So the scientists or the contributions rather of the scientists that were echoed in this scenario, no? So we have five scientists that were instrumental in the conceptualization of electromagnetism. You have Ampere, Faraday, Hertz, Maxwell, and Ørsted. So in this case, you have Ampere, no, and Ørsted. So for those of you who already forgot the contributions of Ampere and Ørsted to electromagnetism, no? So for Ampere, he actually established the principle that elec electricity induces magnetism, while for Ørsted, he was responsible for the uh theory or rather idea that current carrying wires produce electric fields and magnetic fields. Okay, so before we proceed to number seven, let's go first to number four. So for the wind turbines and the electric generator, no? So for the turbine to spin, it needs the movement of the wind. And once the turbine spin, or the blades rather spin, then the generator inside will be able to produce electricity. That's why here, mechanical energy from the wind and the movement of the blade rather is converted to electrical energy. And because there are magnets and wire coils inside the generator that was activated first, no? And then allowing the generation of the electricity. Therefore, for wind turbines, magnetism induces electricity, which was conceptualized by Michael Faraday. Okay? So for number seven, which of the two devices, washing machine versus wind turbine, conserves electricity and why? So the correct answer here is wind turbines, no? Because it can generate electricity as long as there's wind, no? So therefore we'll be able to sustain electricity with less power. I mean, it has lesser power consumption compared to the washing machine, because for washing machine, no, you are reliant or dependent on electricity in order for the washing machine to work. And as time goes by, no, the washing machine will wear off. Okay? So that's it for the part one that was used for 10 Whirlpool. Let's proceed to the other pair of scenarios that was used by the five other sections. Let me just go into that first. Okay, so there you go. So let's start with, on the left, we have the electromagnetic trash collector. The electromagnetic trash collector attracts ferromagnetic or metallic waste, no? Meaning they are composed of iron and steel by its circular magnet to segregate them from other non-ferromagnetic metallic waste and dispose of them properly. So, for the electromagnetic trash to collect ferromagnetic materials, you have to activate um the truck itself before the magnet becomes activated, no? Allowing to collect trash. So for the electromagnetism principle, did electricity induce magnetism, or did magnetism induce electricity in each scenario? So in this case, electricity induced magnetism. And as we established from the previous pair, no, the scientists that were responsible, or rather brought up this idea, were Ørsted and Ampere. They always go together. Number three, will the electromagnetic trash collector temporarily or permanently attract ferromagnetic metallic waste? So if temporarily, why? If permanently, why? So the correct answer here is temporarily, because once the engine is shut down, no, then therefore the electromagnetic trash collector will not collect or pick up or attract rather ferromagnetic metallic waste. And also imagine if the engine is what you call this, the engine is shut down, and then you have the circular magnet permanently attracting metals, and therefore that would cause massive load to the circular magnet, and then probably the entire transportation or vehicle will be destroyed. Okay, so number four, can the electromagnetic trash collector attract aluminum soda cans? If yes, why? If not, how come not? So in the description, we established that the circular magnet can only attract metallic materials made out of iron and steel. And since the soda can is made out of aluminum, then therefore the answer is no. Okay? Next is the magnetometers. So remember in I think, one of our first performance tasks this quarter, magnetometers measure the strength, direction, and changes of magnetic fields over time. The chart above telegraphs the magnetic field strength when the application in a cell phone which I asked you to install, if you still recall, has no bar magnet, and B has is surrounded by a bar magnet. No? So remember na during the experiment, no, I asked you to install the magnetometer application, and then you can see from part one or letter A na there's still magnetic field strength reading, but you know that once the magnet is introduced in close proximity with the cell phone, then therefore the magnetic field becomes stronger. No? So in this case, this is the antithesis of the electromagnetism principle that was established in electromagnetic trash collector. For the magnetometers, magnetism induce electricity. Because for the field strength to be recognized or tabulated in your cell phones, the presence of the magnetic field has to be present first. Kaya magnetism induces electricity. Okay? For scientists, this one is Faraday. Okay? So number seven, if there was no bar magnet placed around the cell phone in the first 21 seconds, in which layer of the Earth's lithosphere was the source of the magnetic field? So this is a call back to our very first lesson in first quarter, no? So yeah, even though you don't have a bar magnet beside your cell phone, it can still track um magnetic field, no? And that's because of the outer core, which makes Earth a giant magnet. Okay? And was it weaker or stronger compared to the bar magnet? So the electric field the magnetic field contributed by the outer core is actually weaker compared to the bar magnet, because as you can see the data, the numbers, no, they are significantly less, or as a lesser or weaker field compared to the bar magnet itself. Okay, so ayan ha, I had four examples for electromagnetism, and I actually was able to insert electric motors and generators in our first two examples. All right. Okay, so let's now move on to part two. Okay. Part two, which is electromagnetic spectrum part one. There are no um there are no problem solving here yet, just mostly concepts. So you have the electromagnetic spectrum. On the left, you have the gamma, followed by the X-ray, ultraviolet, visible, infrared, microwave, and ultimately ending with radio. So numbers 9 to 11, what is the trend of each electromagnetic wave property from gamma to radio? Frequency refers to the number of waves at a certain time. And from gamma, you start with more waves, and with radio, you end with less waves. So therefore, frequency decreases. This one, frequency decreases. Okay. On the other hand, for wavelength, which refers to the number of waves at a certain time, now you start with gamma, which has shorter waves, compared to radio, which has longer waves, so therefore wavelength increases. For energy, which is the amount of radiation dissipated, no? So gamma is considered the most dangerous because it is the most penetrative out of the electromagnetic radiation, while radio is considered the safest, no? So therefore, if you have gamma that is the most dangerous, therefore it has the highest energy, and you end up with radio that has the lowest energy. That's why the trend from gamma to radio for energy decreases. Now, based on your answers from numbers 9 to 11, what proportionality exists between first pair, frequency, and wavelength? So frequency decreases, wavelength increases, therefore you have indirect or inverse relationship. For frequency and energy, when frequency goes down, energy goes down as well. So therefore, they exhibit direct proportional relationship. Okay. For wavelength and energy, wavelength increases while energy decreases. Therefore, just like frequency, the relationship between frequency and wavelength and energy also exhibits indirect proportional relationship. All right. So let's move on to the next part. Designate the component of the electromagnetic spectrum where the frequency values belong and classify whether they are non-ionizing, ionizing, or both. Let's start with radiotherapy, which kills or damages cancer cells and stops them from growing or dividing. In operation, the frequency reaches 6 times 10 raised to the power of 21 hertz. So the electromagnetic wave emitted by radiotherapy is actually gamma, because as you can see, its exponent is 21. And for gamma, all values must be greater than 3 times 10 raised to 19 hertz. And because gamma penetrates the most barriers, no, most known barriers, and therefore gamma is considered to be ionizing, or the most unsafe, or the unsafest. Okay, let's move on to dental imaging. Dental imaging helps dentists diagnose, plan, and monitor oral health conditions where the frequency is 2.20 times 10 raised to 19 hertz. This one belongs to X-ray because X-ray encompasses 3 times 10 to the power of 16 to 3 times 10 to the power of 19. And the coefficient 2.20 is less than 3, so therefore it belongs to X-ray. And just like radiotherapy, X-ray can also penetrate barriers or disintegrate bonds. Therefore, X-ray is considered ionizing. Okay. Next, night vision goggles. Night vision goggles let people see in the dark by amplifying available light, such as moonlight or starlight. No? So for night vision goggles, which have a frequency of 3 times 10 to the power of positive 14, that belongs to the infrared region. So any frequency that has an exponent of 14 is tricky because it encompasses a wide spectrum from infrared down to ultraviolet. But night vision goggles fall onto infrared because by looking at the range 3 times 10 to 11 to 4 times 10 to 14, the frequency for night vision goggles 3 times 10 to the 14 is lower than the threshold for infrared, which is 4 times 10 to the positive 14. And infrared doesn't really only vibrates bonds, so therefore its ionization is non-ionizing. Okay. Lastly, we have counterfeit bill detectors, which check if the money is real or fake by examining the security features. The frequency is 1 times 10 to the positive 16 hertz. Therefore, the counterfeit bill detector belongs to ultraviolet or UV. Okay? Ay, sorry, lipat ko ng pwesto. Ayan. So, bakit po UV? Because in UV, you have 7.5 times 10 to the 14th power to 3 times 10 to the power of 16. And judging by the frequency for the counterfeit bill detectors, 1.00 times 10 to the 16 is less than 3.00 times 10 to the 16, making this device fall under UV radiation. And UV is unique among the components of the electromagnetic spectrum because UV is actually both, can be non-ionizing and ionizing. That's why here I write both. Okay, so these are the concepts for electromagnetic spectrum, and let's now proceed to problem solving. Okay, so part 3, electromagnetic spectrum part 2. The two most common Wi-Fi routers are 2.5 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. The 2.4 gigahertz router has a lower frequency and longer wavelength, while the 5 gigahertz router has a higher frequency and shorter wavelength. So here are the two pyramid formulas. Let's start with the left one. How long is the signal of the 2.4 gigahertz, which when you convert it to hertz is 2.4 times 10 to the power of positive 9 router? 23. Before we solve first, let's answer the question, how will you rearrange the formula to obtain the wavelength or lambda of the router signal? So to solve for wavelength, we have to divide the speed of light in vacuum C by the frequency F. Okay? So let's show the solution first. Speed of light in vacuum is constant. That's 3 times 10 to the power of positive 8 meters per second. divided by 2.4 times 10 to the power of 9 hertz. That will give us an answer of 0.125 meter. Okay, so those are the calculations for the left side. Let's proceed to the right side. Okay, how much harmless radiation is dissipated by the 5 gigahertz or 5 times 10 to the power of 9 hertz router? Okay, so in this problem, we're looking for energy. And to solve for energy, we need to multiply the Planck's constant, which is another constant represented by small letter h, and the frequency in hertz. Okay, so by substituting the values, you have 6.63 times 10 raised to negative 34 joule second times 5 times 10 raised to 9 hertz. That will give you an energy of 3.31 or 32 times 10 raised to negative 24 joules. Okay? Ayan po. Now, which of the 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz routers promises a stronger signal? When we're asking for signal, we have to compare their frequency values. No? So for 2.4, it's for 2.4 gigahertz, it's 2.4, while for 5 gigahertz, it's 5. 5 gigahertz is a higher frequency, therefore it will guarantee you a stronger signal. Okay? On the other hand, which of the 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz routers is advantageous for farther places? For farther places, no, 2.4 gigahertz might have the lower frequency and the weaker signal. However, it can reach farther places because it has a longer wavelength. Remember, frequency and wavelength are indirectly proportional to each other. The lower the frequency, the longer the wavelength. The higher the frequency, the shorter the wavelength. Therefore, if your cell phone or gadget is far from the two routers here, the better option to connect to is 2.4 gigahertz. Okay, so and with that, let's move on to the second half of second quarter. We're done with the first half of second quarter. Okay, part four, reflection, refraction, and plane mirrors. Supply the missing information in the sentences below. I think, never mind. Sorry. Reflection is the bouncing of light waves. Refraction is the bending of light waves due to density differences. Reflection is specular if the surface is even, or diffuse if the surface is uneven. What does each figure below manifest? The diffuse reflection, specular reflection, or refraction? Let's start with 31. A pencil appears bent in a glass of water. At some point when we were younger, no, we asked ourselves, why is it that some objects they appear bent or cut or disjointed when you submerge them in water? For another example of that is popsicle stick or even your eating utensils, probably spoon or fork. So that's because of refraction. Okay? Because refraction refers again to the bending of light waves. No? There are three media here. So you have the gas. Of course, they're surrounded by gas, and then uh, the pencil is submerged in liquid, which is water. I mean, in water, which is liquid, and then you see the view of the bent pencil using the glass, which of course is solid. That's why light waves bend because it passes through different media. Next, for multiple images by two plane mirrors, it manifests, or this scenario rather manifests specular reflection because the surface is even, no? Producing even, also even, or smooth reflections. While your reflection, while walking on a puddle, that exemplifies diffuse reflection, no? Because when you start walking, you disturb the water molecules on the floor or on the land rather. That's why your image appears distorted. Okay? So next, a student strikes his indigo laser 25 degrees from the plane mirror as shown in the reflection ray diagram below. According to the law of reflection, the angle of incidence or theta I is equal to the angle of reflection theta R. What are the theta I and theta R? No? So most of you always assume that just because the arrows landed on those angles, you think that they're all automatically the theta I and the theta R when it's actually not. Okay? So let's start the angle of incidence here. Okay? This red one. No? So it says here that this ray, incident ray, was struck 25 degrees from the plane mirror. Okay? And you have the normal line, which is perpendicular to the plane mirror. That's why the normal line measures 90 degrees. Okay? Theta I is actually the angle between the incident ray and the normal line. So to solve for theta I, you have to subtract 90 and 25. And that will give you 65 degrees. This is your theta I, not 25 degrees. Okay? And some of you will already assume that theta R is now equivalent also to 65 degrees. And that's true because that's part of the law of reflection. But why is it 65 degrees? What if we start um what if we start computing the value between the normal line and the reflected ray? So the angle for the reflected ray is 155 degrees. Okay? And theta R refers to the angle between the normal line and the reflected ray. So to solve for theta R, to start with the larger angle, which is 155 degrees, then minus 90 degrees, and it will also give you 65 degrees. Regardless of where you start, whether on the left side or the right side, you can't go wrong because both of them will give you um the same angle values. Okay? Ayan. The only problem is on how to detect which angle you're going to use. Okay? Next, 35. A foreign tourist or vlogger visits Ifugao. He spots the 37 cm tall wooden statue of the Ifugao Anito rice god Bulul, 23 centimeters in front of a plane mirror. Interpret the LOST of the image and of the Ifugao Anito encircled in yellow. For some reason, this lesson was probably the most tackled out of all the lessons in second quarter. And yet, for some of you, we're still able to, still mostly confused by it. We already had a total of 21 ray diagrams, and I don't know why or how this lesson fails to register with some of you. But this is the purpose of the review. So let's start with location or L. For location, we always choose between front or back. And our objects are always located at the front or at the left side. And because the encircled image in yellow is at the right side, therefore the location of the image is at the back of the mirror. Okay? For orientation or O, we always choose with three options. Upright, if the image is literally the same as the object. Upright and laterally inverted, if only the left and right sides of the image were reversed. And inverted if the image was turned upside down. Okay? So here, if you look closer, no, on the object on the left, the statue is pointing the left, while the image on the right points to the right direction. So therefore, its left and right images were reversed, making its orientation upright and laterally inverted. Okay, let's go S or size. For size, no, we choose between three. Reduce, does it become smaller or dominate? Same size, did nothing change with the height? Or magnified, or was the image enlarged or became taller compared to the object? And obviously here, both the object and the image have the same height, so therefore the size is same. And lastly, for type, we always choose between real and virtual. So real images are formed by intersection of actual or solid lines. actual light rays represented by solid lines, while virtual images are formed by imaginary light rays, which are represented by broken lines. Because the image is the product of the intersection of two imaginary lines, therefore our image in front of the mirror or the plane mirror at least is virtual. Okay. Speaking of mirrors, let's now delve into mirrors and lenses, our optical devices. Okay, part 5, mirrors and lenses, part 1. Type of mirror or lens based on curvature, type of mirror or lens based on actual rays. For the four pictures, no, all of them have smileys as the object being placed infinitely in front of mirrors or lenses. Let's start with 36 and 37. I'll just combine the answers um for this part to avoid confusion, no? Let's start with the type of mirror lens based on curvature. Um, this optical device has two outward curvatures. And if you have two outward curvatures, therefore, this optical device is a biconvex lens. Okay? And judging by the intersecting actual line, solid lines at the F2 region, no? Therefore, biconvex lens is considered a converging lens. Again, this is the second quarter in a row within the school year wherein you have encountered the words converging and later diverging. And again, for some reason, I don't know why some of you always exchange these two terminologies. When we say converging, something meets or collides or crashes within one another. When we say diverging, something separates or splits or spreads out. Okay? Let's proceed to 38 and 39. For 38 and 39, okay? So, this is a mirror because there's only one reflective curvature, no? Um, ayan. And the curvature happens to be outward as well. If it only has one outward curvature, then therefore that mirror is considered convex. Okay? Now, this portion is actually tricky because you have actual lines spreading out of the mirror and in imaginary lines intersecting at the back focus. So, kaninong lines po ang o anong lines ang priority natin? Look at the row from numbers 37, 39, 41, and 43. It says type of mirror or lens based on actual rays. So we have to observe the behavior of the actual rays. And in this case, the actual rays, when they encounter the convex mirror, they start spreading out. That's why convex mirror is considered diverging. Okay? Let's proceed to the third optical device. I excluded plane mirror in this one because that's the easiest. Okay? Let's always focus on the ones that always challenge you and for some reason you always get wrong. Okay? Kaya nagpa-practice tayo. So for the third optical device, you have a lens that has two inward curvatures. Okay? If you have two inward curvatures, that's considered a biconcave lens. Okay? When we say inward, that's concave, and because there are two inward curvatures, concave becomes biconcave. Okay? And just like number 38 and 39, judging whether this lens is converging or diverging is actually again tricky because uh, you have actual lines spreading out from the lens, and you have imaginary lines intersecting at F1. But according to the row, no, 37, 39, 41, and 43, we have to base our judgment or our perspective always on the actual race, no? And as you can see, the actual race spread out upon encountering the center of the lens. Therefore, biconcave lens is considered diverging. Okay? So, last optical device for this part, no? So, you only have one inward curvature. And because you have one inward curvature, no? This refers to concave mirror. This one is easy to detect because you only have actual lines and they actually intersected at the front focus. Therefore, concave mirror is considered converging. Okay? Now, for numbers 44 to 45, let's inspect the ray diagrams of biconvex and biconcave lenses on the left and apply them to the scenario on the right. A student realizes he is nearsighted. When someone is nearsighted, he sees near objects clearly, but far objects blurry. Look at the PowerPoint presentation of Ang Matanda at Ang Dagat or The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway being presented on the TV, and you expect that the TV is far from you. The student borrows his classmate's pair of eyeglasses to test which one will correct his vision. And he eventually found the glasses that would make the appearance of the PowerPoint slide, even the TV by extension, to be clear. So, what lens was applied in the construction of the borrowed pair of eyeglasses? What is its effect on the size of the image? Okay, before we answer that, let's also look at 45. A student with 20/20 vision has difficulty reading a newspaper article due to the small font of the text. She borrows a magnifying glass from her mother so she can read the text clearly. What lens was applied in the construction of the magnifying glass, and what is its effect on the size of the image? So we have to choose between biconvex lens and biconcave lens. For biconvex lens, okay, for the biconvex lens, if the object is very is in close proximity to the lens. Therefore, it will yield a magnified image. So therefore, alin ba sa scenario between 44 and 45 ang nagkakaroon ng magnified image? That's number 45. So therefore, biconvex lens must be answered in number 45. And that makes sense because the purpose of the magnifying glass is to actually magnify very small objects. That's why the effect on the size of the image is magnified or enlarged. Okay? On the other hand, for the eyeglasses, no, for the student suffering from nearsightedness, no, you start with a face that is super big, which is very far from the lens. And on the glasses, no, the image shrunk or was reduced. Therefore, biconcave lens was used in the construction of the eyeglasses. Ayan. Because the image, well, it appears clearer now and it's also reduced. Okay? So those are some of the practical applications of lenses in real life. How about for mirrors? Okay? So I only have one, and that's actually the last part of the mastery test, part 6. Mirrors and lenses, part 2. Okay. A junk food obsessed junior high school student and his mother consult a dentist to examine the source of his toothache. The dentist brings a mirror with an inward curvature to inspect the upper back part of the student's 9.50 mm tall decaying tooth. The mirror has a focal length spanning 2.50 centimeters. So here are some of the questions. I know that we didn't really solve that much when we discussed mirrors and lenses because it will be too complicated and some of you were already giving up on the pyramid formula on the electromagnetic spectrum. But um, the little that we had for mirrors and lenses is actually very simple. Okay, let's start with 46. How long is the radius of the curvature of the mirror? To solve for the radius of curvature, we need to find the focus. And to find the focus, we need to read the problem. Okay? And according to the problem, the focal length is 2.50 centimeters. I don't know why some of you know when I asked when I assess you in your long test or performance task, you always go to the question without reading the introductory statement first. And the introductory statement always gives you the clue on how to answer the succeeding questions. But going back to number 46, in order to solve for C, you have to multiply the focus by 2. So if you have the focus of 2.5 cm, then therefore the value of C is 2 times 2.50 centimeters, giving you 5 centimeters. Okay? So plug it in here. 47. Is the tooth image formed in front of or at the back of the mirror? The object is found at the left side of the mirror. The image is also found at the left side of the mirror. Both of them are found at the left side, so therefore the answer is front. Number 48. How far is the tooth image from the mirror? Don't actually have to solve anything. All you have to do is estimate. Is it at 2.50 centimeter at the focus? At 5 centimeters or at the radius of curvature? Beyond 5 centimeters or beyond C? Between 0 and 2.50 centimeters? That's between the mirror and the focus. Or between 2.50 cm and 5 cm? That's between F and C. Again, when I ask for the loss, you always look at the encircled image, not at the object. Okay? That's why the distance of the tooth image from the mirror is greater than 5. That's why it's beyond 5 centimeters. Okay? Number 49. How do you describe the orientation of the tooth image compared to the student's tooth? The student's tooth, sorry, the tooth image compared to the student's tooth was inverted, turned upside down. Okay? And it actually makes sense to use or wise to use the concave mirror here. Some of you may be wondering, Sir, aanhin ba namin yung nakabaliktad na image when we look at the spoon in front of our spoon where we put our rice and viand, right? This is actually one of the cases wherein using concave mirror is actually wise. The dentists don't have to lean or rather twist their neck para lang po makita yung ilalim or rather yung hindi nakikitang part ng ngipin natin. Don't have to twist their neck, no? So, you only have to use a concave mirror para mag-invert ang image. Para makita yung likod na part ng ngipin. Okay? 50. How do you describe the size of the tooth image compared to the student's tooth? Obviously, the tooth image is now taller compared to the actual tooth, which is the object. Therefore, the size of the tooth image is now magnified. Okay? 51. How tall is the tooth image compared to the student's tooth? Let's first gather the original height, or rather the height of the object, and that's 9.50 millimeters. And we expect that the image is magnified, so taller than the height of the object. If it's taller, then therefore the answer is greater than 9.50 millimeters. And number 52, is the tooth image real or virtual? So the image was formed by the intersection of two um, solid lines or actual light rays. Therefore, the tooth image is considered real. Okay, so there you go. Here is the comprehensive analysis and deconstruction of the mastery test. No, um, some of the questions here, I'm not saying that they will be exactly repeated to the quarterly exam, but some of them will be parallel, no? Baka iniiba ko lang yung given values or binabaliktad ko lang yung mga terminologies, no? And if you're still having problems with the lessons or mastery tests, you will always revisit our video lectures found at the playlist, okay? I don't know what to say anymore about it. You are digitally literate and you have to have you have to find time for your study habits because we know that the lessons for second quarter is already cerebrally challenging and demanding compared to first quarter, and some of you um barely put effort into overcoming your shortcomings into the lessons here. And the video lectures are always available. Okay? So, um, find time for you to review, balik-balikan kung saan kayo nahihirapan, and then don't forget to rest yourselves. Don't also forget to bring your scientific calculator tomorrow. Okay? So, this is it for second quarter. I'm closing um, my official lecture for second quarter. Kaya, good luck and stay safe for tomorrow. Goodbye.